The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place with tall glasses, linen napkins, and a menu that didn't dare print its prices. My sister, Claire, had chosen it, of course she had. She thrived on appearances, on staging every family gathering as if it were a magazine spread. I tried to smile through it, to remind myself I was lucky just to be there, but something about that night felt heavier. The table was long, stretching further than seemed necessary, for just 8 of us. My parents sat at the head, glowing under candlelight, while Claire took charge of the seating. She placed her husband by her side, her kids across from them. She directed chairs as though arranging pieces on a chessboard. Then came me. I started to pull out the seat next to my mom when Claire's voice cut through the chatter, sharp and decisive. "Go sit somewhere else," she said. Just like that. The words hit harder than I expected. I froze, still holding the back of the chair. Everyone looked up. My father cleared his throat as if about to say something, but didn't. Mom reached for her water. The kids whispered and giggled, unaware of the weight in the air. Somewhere else. It wasn't the first time she reminded me I wasn't like them. I'd been adopted as a baby, something my parents always framed as a gift, a miracle even. But Claire, she never missed a chance to underline that I wasn't truly her blood. I moved quietly to the far end of the table, closer to the servers who shuffled past with trays. I tried to swallow the sting and distract myself with the menu. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. The evening carried on with clinking glasses and laughter that seemed to circle around me without ever including me. I ordered the cheapest thing I could find, more out of habit than hunger. I thought maybe, if I just stayed quiet enough, the night would end without further humiliation. But humiliation, I would learn, was only just beginning. Because when the dessert plates were cleared and the server brought over the sleek black bill folder, Claire did something none of us could have predicted. She slid it across the table straight to me. $3,270. And in that moment, sitting alone at the end of the table, I realized this night wasn't about dinner at all. It was a test. And I was going to have to decide what kind of person I would be when family ties were twisted into chains. Sometimes the cruelest words aren't shouted. They're whispered in plain view, disguised as ordinary instructions. When I was younger, my parents loved to tell me the story of the day they brought me home. They said I had been wrapped in a faded blue blanket, the kind hospitals use, nothing fancy. But Mom tucked a small silk scarf into the bundle, a pale green scarf she had worn in college. That scarf became a symbol in our house, though I never told anyone how much I clung to it privately, especially when Claire reminded me that I wasn't real family. Growing up, I learned to live in that tension. My parents' unwavering love on one side, my sister's cold glances on the other. I never fought her directly. I thought if I stayed kind, if I kept showing up, she might one day see me differently. By the time we were adults, the rift had only deepened. Claire married well, or at least she liked to say so. Her husband was a man of numbers, obsessed with investments, portfolios, and appearances. Their children wore designer clothes to Thanksgiving dinners. And though they never said it outright, they treated me as though my adoption had stamped me with a permanent less than. Still, I came when invited. I carried groceries in for my mother, I helped my father set up chairs, I fixed leaky faucets when no one else would. I told myself family meant showing up, even when it hurt. So when Claire suggested an elevated family dinner at one of the most expensive restaurants in town, I didn't argue. I told myself maybe this was her way of extending an olive branch. Maybe, for once, she wanted us all at the same table as equals. But from the moment I stepped into that restaurant, I felt the undertow pulling me elsewhere. The glances from Claire, the way she dismissed me with a flick of her hand as she rearranged the seating, it was clear this wasn't about unity. This was about hierarchy. And when that bill landed in front of me, I knew I wasn't wrong. The strange part? My father didn't object. My mother stayed silent. There was something in the way they looked at me, something I couldn't quite name, that suggested this moment was bigger than it seemed. As if I wasn't just paying for dinner. As if I was being measured. Sometimes the heaviest tests don't come in exam rooms or job interviews. They come at a family table, disguised as dessert. The bill lay in front of me, heavy as a stone. I hadn't touched it yet, but I could feel everyone's eyes watching. The black leather folder might as well have been a trapdoor. Claire's voice was sweet but cutting. "Since you ordered so little, it's only fair you handle the bill this time." She said it with a shrug, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her husband smirked, already leaning back in his chair, as though the matter was settled. I looked at my parents. My father's expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on me. My mother shifted in her seat, her fingers grazing the stem of her wine glass. No one spoke. The silence was deafening. $3,270, I finally said, my voice low. "That's more than my rent." Claire tilted her head, pretending to think. "Well, you've lived here all your life rent-free, in more ways than one." The remark landed for a moment. I considered sliding the folder back across the table, saying no, making a scene. But there was something in my father's eyes, something quiet and deliberate. It wasn't cruelty. It was expectation, as though he wanted to see what I would do. I opened the folder. The numbers glared at me. I thought of my savings account, modest, scraped together from extra hours at work, never meant for something like this. If I paid, it would drain me. If I refused, it would confirm every cruel thing Claire had ever implied, that I didn't belong, that I wasn't capable, that I wasn't family. But then my hand brushed against the silk scarf in my bag. I always carried it, tucked neatly at the bottom. My mother's old scarf, the one that made me theirs. I remembered the story she told me. It was the first thing that made you ours. And I realized, this wasn't about money. This was a test of belonging, a test of character. If I wanted to survive it, I had to decide the rules of the game myself. Family can break you with silence, but it can also reveal who you truly are when you choose how to answer. I slipped the bill back into the folder and rested my hands on top of it, as if steadying myself. My sister leaned forward, waiting for me to squirm, to protest. Her husband whispered something to her, and they both chuckled softly, convinced I was cornered. But I didn't look at them. Instead, I looked at my father. He gave me nothing in return, just a quiet stare, his fingers tapping once against the table. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt deliberate, like a code. He wanted me to think. I began replaying the evening in my head. Claire arranging the seats. My parents' silence. The expensive restaurant chosen, when there were simpler options. The bill pushed toward me like a gauntlet. None of this was random. It was staged. The puzzle was why. I thought of all the years I had accepted being treated as an outsider, telling myself kindness was enough. But what if this was never about kindness? What if my father wanted proof that I could stand tall even when someone tried to push me down? I leaned back, scanning the table. My niece tugged at her spoon absent-mindedly. My nephew drummed his fingers on the side of his chair. They weren't part of this test, not really. But one day, they would remember how I handled it. That realization weighed more than the bill itself. So, I asked myself, what is the real cost of this dinner? If I refused to pay, I would save my account, but I'd cement my role as the other. If I paid silently, I'd lose nearly everything I had but gain no respect. It would only feed Claire's cruelty. The scarf brushed against my wrist again when I reached for water. I pulled it out quietly, spreading, not money, not status. Belonging. If I could turn this bill into a statement, not of wealth but of who I was, I might solve it. So I lifted my head, looked at Claire directly for the first time all night, and prepared to make my move. The most important puzzles in life aren't solved with numbers. They're solved with courage. I cleared my throat, the kind of sound you make when you're about to say something that can't be taken back. The table quieted, even the children sensing a shift. I held the folder in my hand, the scarf resting beneath it like a secret shield. $3,270, I said again, more firmly this time. It's not just a bill. It's a choice. Claire rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. It's dinner. But I shook my head. No, it's not. This isn't about food. This is about who pays, who belongs, and who carries the weight. For the first time that evening, my father leaned forward. His expression softened, almost proud, though he didn't speak. My mother's eyes shimmered with something I couldn't name. And then it hit me. This wasn't Claire's test. It was his. My father had orchestrated this. He had let her push me, had stayed silent on purpose, had let the cruelty play out. Not because he agreed with her, but because he wanted to see me answer for myself. To see if I would keep shrinking away, or if I would finally claim my place at this table. It was the realization I had avoided for years. Every small slight, every cold remark from Claire, every time my parents didn't step in to defend me, it hadn't only been neglect. It had been a mirror, a stage set for me to find my own voice. I placed the folder back in the center of the table, deliberately, not keeping it in front of me, but not sliding it back to her either. "I'll pay," I said, my voice steady. "But not because you told me to. I'll pay because family isn't about who spends the least or who has the most. It's about who shows up. And I always show up." The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire's smirk faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain, as though she had expected me to crumble, but not to rise. My father nodded once, slow and deliberate, before sitting back again. His silence no longer felt cruel. It felt like recognition. And deep inside, I knew something had shifted forever. Sometimes the greatest revelation isn't about others at all. It's realizing your own worth and daring to declare it. The waiter returned just then, hovering politely, waiting for direction. I handed him the folder, my fingers still brushing the edge of the scarf on my lap. He took it without question, disappearing into the dim glow of the restaurant. Claire let out a laugh, brittle and forced. "Well, if you insist. You'll have to forgive us if, you know," she went on louder now. "I suppose it makes sense. You've always been the outsider. Outsiders have to prove themselves, don't they?" I felt my chest tighten, but before I could reply, my father spoke. "Enough, Claire." His voice was calm, not raised, but it silenced her instantly. He rarely stepped in during these skirmishes, which made his words thunder louder than shouting ever could. The table went still, everyone waiting for what he would say next. "You think life is about who sits where or who pays the bill," he said, his eyes fixed on her. "But family is about something deeper. Something you don't seem to understand yet." Claire's cheeks flushed red. She looked down at her plate, fuming but quiet. Her children glanced between us, confused but sensing the shift in power. The waiter returned with the receipt, discreetly setting it beside me. I signed it quickly, each stroke of the pen feeling less like surrender and more like a declaration. Yes, it drained me. But at that moment, I realized the money wasn't the point. It was the statement that mattered. Still, the air was heavy with tension. Claire wasn't finished. I could see it in her jaw, tight and clenched, her mind already searching for the next blow. And sure enough, as we stood to leave, she tried one more time. "You can pay for dinner," she hissed quietly as she passed me, "but you'll never buy your way into this family." Her words stung, but only for a second. Because this time, I wasn't shrinking. This time, I was ready to confront her fully, in the open, where no whispered cruelty could hide. When family tests you, the hardest part isn't paying the price. It's standing tall in the storm that follows. We stepped out into the night air, the restaurant doors closing behind us with a heavy thud. The city lights shimmered on the sidewalk, and the chill made me pull the scarf tighter around my neck. I could feel Claire's presence at my side, sharp and restless, like she was itching for a fight she couldn't let go. My parents lingered near the curb, waiting for the valet. My father stood tall, hands behind his back, while my mother wrapped her shawl closer. Claire's children were half asleep, leaning against their father. The night should have been winding down. But Claire wasn't done. "You embarrass me in there," she snapped suddenly, low enough that only I could hear. "You think paying for one dinner makes you part of this family? You'll never be one of us. Never." Her words landed like stones, but something inside me had changed at that table. Instead of shrinking, I turned to face her. "I don't need to buy my way in," I said, voice steady. "Mom and Dad chose me long before you ever had a say. That scarf? It was theirs. It made me theirs. And nothing you say can change that. She had hated it as a girl, the way our mother always told the story with pride. That scarf was a symbol she could never erase. You think a rag makes you family? She spat. I shook my head slowly. Not the scarf. The love behind it. The choice. That's what makes me family. And maybe one day, you'll understand that family isn't about bloodlines or money. It's about showing up when it matters. For the first time in years, Claire didn't have a retort ready. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes burning, but no words came. My father, who had been watching quietly from a few steps away, finally walked toward us. Enough, he said again, this time standing directly between us. His voice was calm, but it carried authority that left no space for argument. He turned to me. You did well tonight. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of decades. Claire's face crumpled for a moment, as though the ground had shifted under her. She opened her mouth, then closed it, her fury dissolving into silence. And for the first time in my life, standing there under the city lights with the scarf at my throat, I realized I wasn't the outsider anymore. Sometimes the true confrontation isn't with another person, it's with the fear that kept you silent all along. The valet pulled up with my parents' car, headlights washing over us. My father gestured for my mother to get in first, then placed a firm hand on my shoulder. His grip was steady, reassuring, the kind of gesture I had longed for since childhood. Do you know why I let this happen tonight? He asked quietly, his eyes locked on mine. I hesitated. Because you wanted me to prove myself? He shook his head. No. Because I wanted Claire to see you prove yourself. She needed to see what strength looks like, what belonging looks like. His words hit deeper than I expected. For years, I thought their silence in the face of her cruelty meant indifference. But now I understood it had been deliberate. Painful, but deliberate. My father had trusted me to rise. And I had. Claire stood off to the side, arms crossed, her face shadowed in the glow of the streetlight. For once, she looked small, as if the ground beneath her certainty had eroded. Her children tugged at her sleeve, restless and tired, and she didn't even notice. I turned to her. I don't hate you, Claire. I never did. But I won't let you treat me as less anymore. One day, your kids will ask what family means. And they'll remember tonight. You get to decide what lesson they carry. Her eyes flickered then, just for a moment, with something that looked like doubt. Or maybe shame. She said nothing, but silence was enough. My father opened the car door for me. Come sit by your mother, he said. The simple invitation. As we drove away, I looked back through the rear window. Claire stood frozen on the sidewalk, the night wind tugging at her hair. For the first time, she was the one left outside, watching the family car drive away without her. And it struck me, belonging had never been about blood. It had never been about who paid the bill. It was about love freely given and courage quietly claimed. The legacy of that night wasn't the money I spent. It was the truth that finally settled into my bones. I wasn't just chosen once as a baby, I had chosen myself now, fully, as family. True inheritance isn't wealth or approval. It's the strength to claim your place and live with dignity. Weeks later, the bill cleared from my account, leaving a dent I felt every time I checked my balance. But strangely, it didn't bother me. Every dollar spent had become something more valuable than savings. It had become proof that I could carry myself with dignity, even when pushed into a corner. Life didn't magically soften after that night. Claire still kept her distance, her words still sharp when we crossed paths. But something had shifted between us. She no longer looked at me like prey. If anything, there was a wary respect in her silence. My father, though, was different. He started calling more often, asking about my work, my days, little things he used to leave to Mom. One evening, he stopped by my apartment with a small package. Inside was the green silk scarf, freshly cleaned and carefully folded. You've outgrown needing a reminder, he said, placing it in my hands. But I want you to keep it anyway. One day, maybe, you'll pass it on. I held it close, and for the first time, I felt not just like the child who had been chosen, but like someone strong enough to choose for themselves, to carry forward love instead of bitterness, to be the kind of family member who shows up even when it costs something. And that, I realized, was the true inheritance my parents wanted me to have. Not money, not property, but the strength to live with courage and